Okay, let's not panic. Let's try to do some stuff. So I'm thinking of a table design that I could do on the shopbot where I take the bolt design that I already have and I just kind of like apply it to shopbot kind of stuff. And I think I could make. I think part of the designs that I have on the laser cutter, the problem with them is that they just take too long to make, right? So maybe I can focus on kind of larger scale stuff. And I'm thinking that I could make a table that you kind of pop in different 12 by 12 panels that have different designs on them. And then I could have a way to effectively sell different kinds of tables with different tops, but not worry too much about the crazy frame idea that I have already made, which takes like a whole month to cut. If we could get something that I could just cut in a day and screw together, right, then I might be in a good place. Before we get to that, though, so I've been trying to think about Tau Depot memory for the for like what memory goes where, right? And how do we reserve that memory and all that kind of stuff? And I'm thinking that to formalize this, right? There's a lot of different cells where things can go, and I'm thinking that, okay, flat is better than nested, but eventually it's like to put all the different things that need to be, right, we have a lot of memory here, right? So we have this big block here, right? And this big block is divided into 16 sections, right? And then there's little tiny variables here, right? So there's like, in each one of these is like 32 variables, right? Or 16 by 16, so that, no, 255, right? So 255 times, well, actually, it's, I can do that easier. So each variable is just 4 pixels, right? So if it's a 512 by 512, then that means we just divide that in half, 128 by 128, and 128 times 128, how much stuff is that, right? That is, come on, 128 times 128, what is that number? 128 is like 16,000, right? So do you really want one file that is going to document all possible 16,000 variables or that could be held within the memory, right? That seems a little bit much. So I'm thinking that we have this thing called Tauname, and all Tauname does is it formalizes what the top level is used for, right? So so we just keep something like this, and the UIREX is going to use tau00 right here, and then the editor vars is tau15, right? This is 15 here, and the Uilist thing that I want to work on can be tau14, right? And we can have a place where we centralize that kind of information. And I was thinking, oh, well, we could do this, and then we could swap around where the memory is, right? I'm thinking, no, let's not do that. Let's not build this to be flexible. Let's just build this as a way to have a high-level overview and be able to find things, right? So this is kind of going to be some self-documenting code just to find our way around the code base. And I don't think I ever want to use this directly, right? Like, I don't want to use this variable directly. I just want to use it as a way to do asserts on this value and make sure that it matches, right? So now, with that said, I'm thinking Tauname, right, comes after Tau Depot, right? Because then we can do this. We can say define, right? We can do a define on all this stuff, right? Define. And then these tau, whatever the hex, they're actually those are actually shorthand for Tau Depot, whatever the heck, right? So we can take all these, right? We can take all these for a second. And we can go up here. We can go up here and we can put this like here or something. Make some more room here. We can go here and we can define shorthand really quick. We can just go define tau, whatever the heck, right? Boom, boom, boom. These things. And they're defined, so they're not set equal. They're just defines, right? And we just one-to-one map these, right? And let's we can keep that, and then we can undef it down here, right? So we can undef it. And obviously this is very cluttery, right? But now I don't know if we really need a checksum, because let's do a checksum anyways, just for consistency, even though it doesn't really matter. We can just steal these numbers. And then over here, right, we can do the same kind of checksum thing. And the other thing is I want to get rid of the commentary. And then these defines here, right? And now, why are we going to make them defines? Well, we're going to make them defines so that we can do some compile time trickery with it. So let's remove kind of this thing here, right? And then, let's take this commentary, and say, C doc slash Tauname, original thoughts, right? So doc slash Tauname original thoughts, right? So we're going to take all those thoughts we had, and we're just going to put them in here, right? So these are some thoughts I'm having as to how the heck is this going to work, right? So what the heck? So seriously, serious question here. What is the purpose of a struct, right? If flat is better than nested, what is the real purpose of a struct? How much, at what point do you need to formalize something in code, and what point do you just have to have kind of well-organized commentary, right? And that's kind of what I'm struggling with. Where to put stuff? Where do you put things? Right, when you're organizing code, it's like, where do you put the code? And what do I mean by that? So let me, So, by trying to formalize things, by trying to formalize your code and organize your code, you can end up adding more containers, right? Adding more containers to your code, and you can end up over-containerizing your code, right? So if you go too far one way, you over-containerize your code. If you go too far structured, you end up over-containerizing your code, right? It's like everything is too structured, right? It can be overly structured. But if you go the other way and everything's all loosey-goosey all over the place and everything's just loose, you can have kind of very spaghetti code. So it's like, how do you manage that? So this is going to be my compromise, where I'm going to try to, you know, if I want to know where hashtag UIREX, so if I want to know where all the UIREX memory is, right? then this is going to help me, right? This is going to be a centralized place, right? And rather than using, so I'm thinking that, remember, we want the memory to not be flexible. We just want to be able to, we don't want to have to shuffle, we don't want to have the flexibility of shuffling stuff around, right? So we don't want to use Tauname UIREX and then just be able to use this name instead of this name. We want this to just be an assert that's used on this, right? To make sure that this equals this all the time, right? So we don't want to use for, yes, use for asserts. Okay. Yes. Use for high-level understanding. No. No. Not to be used to flex. So what am I talking about here? Hold on. So let's make a note here. So, you know, at vid IID 0203, time 12. Okay, so what do I mean by not used to flexibly change memory? Like, what do I mean by this? I mean that we're never going to directly use these. We're never going to directly use these when we're using commands. So if we're going to Tau Depot for a second, open up Tau Depot and open up the functions. So this Tau Depot paint, so this Tau 15 is used for editor vars. So, wrong. So this whole idea right here is wrong, right? The correct way to do this is assert that tau 015 equals tau 015 equals, and then we do this thing here. And then instead of using this, we just use we would do something more like this. Or actually, so instead of doing this, we would do this, or we could just do it like this, right? We could do it without that, right? We could do this. that would also be valid. But we want to say that this editor variables, right, is going to be used for tau15, right? But we don't want to use it directly in here. We want to use tau15 for that. And so this is wrong. Okay. And this one is correct. Okay. And so the difference here, wrong. Do not use not for flexibility, right? This is not supposed to be used for flexibility here, right? So then over here, this assert here, right, so basically, not abstract, so not we want to use it directly. We want to use we don't want to use it flexibly like this. We want to avoid abstraction, right? So I don't know if we want to leave that comment in there because that makes it pretty long. But it is kind of important. It is kind of important, right? That we want to use it like this, not like this. That is a design choice so that it's a design choice because if we try to flexibly move stuff around, I don't really see the advantage of that. I mean, like you can definitely think about reasons for why you might want to write your code more flexibly, like, oh my god, what if I want to move everything around? What if I want to do this? What if I want to do that? And I think that's a trap. That's a trap where things aren't, where you think you want to do something like that, but it's really just going to screw you over. It's just going to make your code more complicated, right? We just want to say, you know, tau15, right? So tau15 right here, editor vars is a synonym for tau15. Editor vars is not a editor vars is not a editor vars is a synonym for tau15. Editor vars is not a flexible way to switch what tau number editor vars is stored in, if that makes sense. So Tauname not to be used for flexibility. So let's just make a note here, right? that Tauname is not to be used for flexibility. And let's just put that in here, right? We got all this commentary. Let's throw that commentary in here because I think it's kind of cluttery. And the most important thing we want to know here is that it's not supposed to be used for flexibility, right? Right, so it's not... So, example. Summary. Is an alias for is not a way to flexibly chain relocate memory. So, right, so yes. Correct. So, summary, right? Correct, right. Tauname Edivers is an alias for Tau015, right? But what it's not, to warn you, Tauname Edivars is not a way to flexibly relocate memory by changing its underlying value, right? So it's not supposed to be used in that kind of manner, right? Now you could see some advantages to why you'd want to do that, right? Where it's like, oh, we can just change the underlying value, and oh, we can just swap and move stuff around, and oh, that's awesome, right? We don't want to do it that way. So, and so basically what I mean by that is that Tau15 should always mean this, right? This value and this value should always be the same, right? We're not using this value so that we can assign it to Tau1 or Tau14 or something in the future, right? Tauname Edivars is always Tau15, right? And so we want it to be like that so that the idea is that this is the authoritative name, right? And this is a synonym that helps us understand the code a little bit better when we're not familiar with the code base. But when we're familiar with the code base, we just need to know, oh, Tau15, right? That's editor variables, right? We don't need to look at this. So this is just a way to help wrap our minds around the code when we don't know it very well, if that makes sense. So we're taking this and just saying, you know, Tauname not to be used for flexibility. And then also let's also oops. Let's also date this, right? So date 002400. So the thing here is like this is a whole bunch of like commentary, right? I'll look at all this commentary, right? So the reason why we're going to offboard all this is because it's really cluttering up this, right? So so let's put this over here and just say let's try to remove the comments from here and just say, you know, C doc/h So it's not for remapping, right? It's not for remapping memory, right? So let's kind of like, let's put this in here like this, and just make a nice little section, and just put these two commentaries right at the top, right? And then we can also kind of like make a little hashtag warning kind of a thingy. Okay. Tauname not for remapping, right? So in here, is right? So in other words, this is always true, right? And it's kind of risky, right? Because we're saying we're intentionally making the code less flexible, right? We want to be careful that it's not misused, right? Because a lot of people, that's not how they think of things usually, right? So, edivars. And this does mean we're digging ourselves into a hole, potentially. It does mean we're potentially digging ourselves into a hole, but the idea is that we want certainty of how everything goes together. We don't want to be moving things around. Like, if you don't have with maximum flexibility, you have no structure. With maximum flexibility, you have no certainty where everything is, right? And I want certainty with where everything is going to be, right? So, this right here, unused, right? So these parts are unused right here in the blue, right? Now we could just maybe make more sense to just blank these out, like this one, too, right? And so eventually we're gonna fill these out, right? But these are unused, right? So that's why we have, it says free, right? So we're gonna change these names eventually, but they're free spots, they're unused spots. But yeah, something like this, I think is how I want to do this, right? It's kind of ugly because we have to like define all of this and then undefine it here, but that's kind of like how I want to do this. Okay, cool. So, that's kind of my thought on this. Let's also make another thing. At vid id. And 30. Okay, let's explain this one more time for the camera. so that I have a little timestamp up here. So for the camera, we're going to explain this, okay? Actually, let's say 30. Do we just want to wait for 3042? I'm going to wait for 3042 and get ready here. Because I like, 42, want to be cool, right? So we're going to explain this for the camera. Let's wait. Let's wait. All right. All right, to explain for the camera, explaining for the camera right now, this system here, it's not really a system, it's just a way to formalize what tau 0, tau 1, tau 2, tau 3, etc. from the tau depot system are used for, right? So tau 0, 0 is going to be used for UIREX, right? UIREX, right? And tau 15 is being used for editor variable memory, right? And tau 14 is going to be used for user interface list, right? So it's going to be used for a list of user interface buttons for the different user interfaces, right? And these ones are not used for anything yet. And so what do I mean by formalization, right? So what I mean is we're never going to use this directly in a call. We'll always use this, right? This is the name of this, but these names here, the name here, the name here, and the name here is just for people who are not familiar with the code base. But if you're familiar with the code base, you should be using these, right? You should be using these. So what do I mean by that? So if we look over here, right? Here's an example of the wrong way to use this. With tau depot put, tau name editor vars right here. This is not how we want to do this. Okay? How we want to do it is we can assert and make absolutely sure that tau 15 is editor vars, and then it's tau 15 that we're going to use right here on this tau depot put call, right? So so what we're not doing is we're not trying to use this system here to make the code more flexible. Like, I absolutely need to drill that in, right? That this is, tau name is not for remapping, it's not for making code more flexible. Okay, so that means that we're never gonna say, oh, we wanna see what'll happen if we store the UIREX in a different block of memory. So let's make this, instead of making it a 0, let's just swap it to 1, right? And we have this immense leverage to just change where in the texture memory we're storing this set of variables. We're not going to do that. Now, it seems kind of like a fun idea, right? To be able to, to just use this as a symbolic constant, to be able to have that kind of leverage, to just move big blocks of memory around like that, but we are not going to do that. Okay, so why are we not going to do that? The reason we're not going to do that is because this kind of violates the... First of all, it violates the terseness of the code, right? So this is the actual name. This is the name that we actually want to use, and this is just here to help us understand what that name means and formalize what that name means in the code, right? So this is the actual name, right? So we do not want to use this as a symbolic constant. We want to always be using this name, and then in the documentation tells us what tau 000 is. Okay, so that's kind of a weird way to do it, but the idea is that we want very rigid, inflexible code. Okay, so I know a lot of people, they're kind of trying to focus on flexible code and easy to refactor code, but that's not our goal at all. Our goal is to have code that we can easily find our way through, right? That it's done in such a rigid way where there's a lack of abstraction, right? The less abstraction, the easier it is to comprehend, right? So that means that we are going to end up digging ourselves into a lot of holes, right? Because we have to make some decisions. We have to make some decisions and really commit to those decisions, right? So when we're looking at tau depot, right, and we're trying to figure out how to subdivide this 512 by 512 block of memory and figure out what the different sections of memory are going to be used for, we're going to commit, right? So tau 15 is this block of memory right here is always going to be used to store variables for the different editors, right? We're going to commit to that, right? And then within here, right, the subdivisions of this tau here, of tau 15, 0 is always going to be used for the tau itself, or GPU view in other words. 1 is always going to be used for PAINT5D, which is editor number 1. This block 2 is always going to be used for editor number 2 variables, always editor 3 number variables, always editor number 4 variables. We're not going to try to make things flexible. But yeah, so I just want to hone that in, right? This is not like that's not like in OpenGL code where you have different different defined variables that point to hex numbers, and you don't want to use the hex numbers directly because that'll break the code if the headers change. That's not how we're doing this, right? We actually want to use these values, right? Tau 1 is just the number 1, tau 2 is just the number 2, tau 3 is always the number 3, right? We want to directly use these values everywhere and not directly use these. Now we can use these variables to help, like, in assertions, right? So if we're, like, over here with this example, right? So we don't want to do this, right, where we use tau name editor vars right here. We want to use tau 15 because tau 15 is editor variables, right? But then if we want to use editor variables, we can do it like this. Assert that tau 15 is editor variables. We can do this. So why are we doing it this way? Well, the thing is, if we have two variables that are linked to that mean the exact same thing, that's going to create some problems for us if we have to search through the code, and we end up having to search for both this in the code base, and then we have to also search for this in the code base, right? That's going to create some huge problems for us. So we don't want that problem, but we also want some more clarity to this tau 15 thing, right? Because this tau 15, it's very terse, right? So it's terse, but it's also the authoritative variable name, right? So we want to have this name to kind of self-document the code and make it a little bit clearer, but we don't want to add the problem of, oh god, now we have to search for this variable in all of the code, and we have to search for this variable in all the code. This tau 15 is the authoritative variable, whereas this variable is just in the code to help self-document and also to make the code even more rigid, right? Because now this assert is also making the code more rigid, because now we're further digging our position into the code and saying this tau 15 is always this thing, right? I don't know if that made much sense, because I know I'm just doing things in a kind of a very weird way, but I absolutely want to make sure that this isn't used in the wrong way. So this is just a centralized way for us to figure out what all of these different memory slots are being used for without over structuring the code, right? So we could potentially try something like we could potentially do something like this, right? Don't do this. So let's make a don't do this section. Okay, and then we're going to so we want all the actual code to be kind of the first thing we see, right? So we've offboarded these comments to the documentation file, and then we have the video ID. So we have the comments are the last thing people are going to look at, right? So we don't want the comments to take up too much room, but we also want the ability to be very verbose with our comments, so we offboarded these to files, right? Right, so this doc/h thing, right, is the documentation.h thing here, and then we just take these comment stubs, right, that have all of this, you know, busy, blah, 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 blah kind of stuff, right? We don't want to look at this all the time, right? It's just like, if we don't know what's going on, then we can look at this to see more information. Okay, so... Okay, what else? So let's go with this don't do this section, and let's see, don't do this. Don't do this. I know I probably hounded that into the ground a little bit too far, because I see somebody dropped out here, but anyways, what we don't want to do is like, you know, struct, AAC, struct, AAC 2020 Tauname library. Right, we don't want to do this, where we do this, and then we do, like, you know, equals. Okay. And then, you know, and then here, right, we could have struct AAC 2020 right, we could do this. Right, and then we could do this. Right, we could do Uirex, and then we could do Uilist, right? And then we could do, like, editor variables, right? But I think this is, so I think this is over-containerized, right? I think this is over-containerized, and that's why I don't think this is a good idea. So what we could do is we could do Tauname, I don't know. I think this is too, this is too containerized, right? So then in here we could do, you know, editor variables, right? And we have like struct right, and then we could have, like, you know, P5D tile value, right? And then we could do, like, dot, you know, you could do dot, edivars dot PAINT5D dot P5D TV equals some define here. So I think this is overly containerized, right? It's nice, it looks nice. It looks nice, but I think it's overly containerized. I think this is overly structured. I think this is overly structured. So this right here, I think this is this kind of idea is overly structured. So we don't want to do this. So what we're also going to do is to prevent us from doing this in the future, right? Let's say we come back to this code and we decide to do it because, you know, what you do is pretty easy to document. What you don't do is kind of hard to document. Like, why did you not make a certain decision? Why did you not make a certain decision, and how do you prevent people from coming into the code later and making that decision that you really wanted not to make, right? So you want to explicitly forbid things somehow. So don't get me wrong, like, I really like the idea of, like, making this kind of this thing here. But a better solution would be, you know, if we really want something like this, AAC Tauname, edivars, right? And then PAINT5D, P5D, TV. Like, if we really want to do this, it could be like this, right? So, you know, something like this could be okay. So something like this could be okay, and we could offboard things. Yeah, we could offboard things. Editor variables. This is the sub PAINT5D. We could do something like this. This would be okay. So let's make a this is okay section. Hold on. So the idea is that we don't need an actual struct, right? We just need to have the discipline to name things in a way where we can find them, right? So we're saying this P5D TV thing, this TV right here, PAINT5D var TV, right? So we're saying that right? That this is equal to this, right? Like, that's okay. Like, this is okay, and we should consider it, right? So right, so we can consider something like this. That's fine. But speaking of what's not okay, we're going to take what's not okay here. This town name thing, we don't want to use a struct for it. And so we're gonna explicitly outlaw it, right? So the way we're going to explicitly outlaw it is we're going to go down here. We're going to go define so we're going to define, don't do this AAC town name, right? So we're going to make it so that if we try to create a struct like this, that it's going to blow up in our face, right? And we're going to do that intentionally so that we don't have that problem, right? So this, we need a line continuation, right? I really don't like line continuing things, but it's going to be the easiest way to get this to happen with these defines being as big as they are. Okay. So those are kind of my thoughts on this. Maybe we should kind of finish this up. Maybe we should at least, before we work on kind of table designs, we should throw this in, right? So we so we can include this system. This system Tauname is gonna go like after, right? It's referencing Tau Depot stuff, so let's remember that. Let's make sure this runs first. I don't know why it's kind of not doing anything here. What the hell? There we go. So P for pattern, right? So we have this thing, right? If we go too far and the UI kind of like can't fit anymore, it disappears. The UI is actually, it's not just disappearing though. It's actually filling this area, but then the visibility gets turned off. And we're just doing that as rectangles aren't allowed to go negative in my system. So if this tries to go off the border, we can't allow that. So we're just gonna say if this tries to go off the border because there's not enough room for it, then we snap it to here and then we make it invisible, which you can't see here, but that's how I've implemented it to avoid problems, right? And we can zoom in and we can move stuff around, right? So there's much more work to be done, but we're getting somewhere, I think. Okay, so now we want to formalize kind of all these thoughts we've had about how we're organizing things. And the reason I'm going to take this Tauname thing like this is because I've had pretty good success with it for like Pixname, right? Pixname is one of those things. So we're gonna look over here, right? And we have UI frags, Tau frag, Tau fragment shaders. So Tau fragment shaders should probably be able to know about the so I'm thinking we have Tau Depot. I'm thinking it goes between. It goes right after Tau Depot, right? So Tau Depot is the original thing, and Tauname is going to be a way to kind of like formalize. Tau Depot, Tauname is basically has the same function as Tau Depot. It's just kind of going to formalize some of these names a little better, right? It's a centralized place to formalize some of this stuff, right? So I think Tauname, and then we could make a Tau sub, right? Tauname. So here's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking Tauname, Tau sub. Not needed. Not really needed. Tau, so Tau vars could be, like, Tauname, but for... Right, we could do it like that. We could do something like that. Or we could just keep it all centralized in Tauname, and we could just let that list... We could just have a centralized list where everything just gets very big, right? We could do something like this, or we could just say, if things need to be broken up, we could just do, you know, Tauname.data .paint5D, right? And then Tauname.data UIREX, right? And the Tauname.d what else we got? So I think that might actually be better. So in here, Right, so this code should be like a centralized place for variables related to the tau system, right? So let's try to centralize this and not have tau var, tau sub, whatever the heck. Let's just say that if we need to break it apart, we can break it apart into Tauname PAINT5D, Tauname Uilists, which directly will match this Uilists, Uilists, editor vars, right? So we could do Uilists, d, eddy vars, right? So we could do something like that, right? Something like that would be fine. Or maybe not editor vars. Well, maybe, right? Something like this would be okay. Sure, okay. So, we're thinking it's just a way, if we look at Tau Depot for a second, save this, let's look at Tau Depot. Right, so Tau Depot is kind of like trying to figure out how this kind of stuff works. And we're saying that maybe we want, that this kind of thing, we look at Tau Depot functions. Tau Depot has like some pretty specific functions, right? Okay, it has the Tau Depot put and the Tau Depot get, right? And so it's pretty heavy duty, right? So the idea would be to break this apart, right? To say Tau Depot just stores these constants tau, right? Tau, and then sub, right? Sub Tau Depot, sub PAINT5D, right? It's going to store these kind of constants. But here we're going to put code to just further centralize and organize our thoughts on this stuff. And maybe it's a bad idea. I don't know. It could be. I don't know. We will think about it as we go by. What the purpose of this is, right? But I'm thinking that we want to keep flat is better than nested, right? So the idea is that, Tau Depot VPC is always supposed to be used for Tau 15 and subsystem, right? Dex sub PAINT5D, etc. Right? Like try to keep it like that, or it's kind of flat and we just know how to use it. And then over here we can use this to formalize things. Oh, great. Got bugs down here. Well, what did I expect? It's a fucking... What kind of... Oh, that's a spider. Great. Great. Fucking spiders. Let's see. What do we got? Alright. Hold on. I have to imprison this spider before it... Now, if we could just kill all the bugs so we don't have spiders, that would be nice. Oh, hey, there's my nuts. Found you. You motherfucker. Okay. I just don't, I don't want to be assassinated by a spider while I'm trying to work, right? So, yeah, I think that, that having a centralized place for where this stuff is might help. And I might be wrong here. I don't know. Maybe I'm just making things overly complicated. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, right? So what is it? The correct decision too late. The correct answer too late is the wrong answer, right? So we have to kind of find something and commit to it, and then just hope that it's right, right? So we also need to figure out UI lists. So we had some thoughts about this. Not UI recs. UI lists. So I'm thinking with UI lists, we just have a we really just want to upload something to what does the interface need to look like, right? So I'm thinking you know, AAC 2020 UI lists put, right? And it would be like tau depot, right? So it'd be like tau depot. And the put command, right, it would take like something like this, tau depot. Well, actually, it would always take, it would always use the, internally, it would use the tau for UI list, right? So it would use UI recs, right? So UI recs is tau 0, 0, right? So, you know, int32 or UO8 tau 0, 0. Right? So it would have this. So we wouldn't supply that. And then the sub we'd say UI list, we would definitely do the sub, right? So we'd use like so it'd be like EO8 tau depot sub subdex, right? So we'll call it tau depot subdex so we know where to find it from. It could be tau depot subdex, but it could also be so tau depot sub PAINT5D, yeah. So this thing, tau depot sub PAINT5D, right? Or it could be like, it could be, or, oh, I see. Or Tauname. Let's try to keep Tauname to, I'm thinking we want to keep, this Tauname to kind of top level. Tauname and then subname, I don't know. This could be Tau Depot's subdex, right? Okay, so anyways, we're using this, and then we have the variable dex. But instead of using a variable index, right, this subindex just locates what system it's for. And then, I'm thinking we could do something like this, like, we have 0 to 255. 255 elements, right? So we're saying the user interface cannot have up to 255 different things. Is that not a bit much? I feel like it is. I don't see any reason why I would ever want that many things. 256, well, what's reasonable? What's reasonable? What would fit on the screen? Let's think about what would fit on the screen for a second, right? So, like, so let's try to make a list, right? And we're making a list, and let's say the canvas is like 512 by 512, and each one of our user interface elements is like, you know, 8 pixels by 8 pixels high, right? Because we're using really small font, right? So if we divide that by 8, right? And we see that, we got 64. So I'd say 64, a list of 64 is about as big as we want. So, I'm thinking, if we have 256 divided by 64, what do we got? We have 4, right? So we could have 4. So I'm thinking we could have up to 4 user interface lists. And they each can have up to 64 max elements. So what I'm thinking is, you know, U08, list dex 0 is going to be like 0, 1, 2, or 4, like that, right? We could do it like that. But this index is... I need to get a sweater, it's kind of cold. But this list index could identify what user interface list we're working with. And so, like, UI rect 1 would be 0, right? Or it would be 1. Maybe we want to make UI rect, oops. Maybe we want to make UI rect 1 something else. Or, I don't know. Or we have UI rect 0, maybe 0 is for something special or something. UI rect 1, UI rect 2, UI rect 3, right? Maybe we just want to keep a 1-to-1 mapping and just skip 0 for now. So this could be the list index, right? And then this could be a U08 UI list a button index, right? So a button index, right? Something like this, right? And so this is how we locate it, and then for the button value, so then we so we had 64. So I'm thinking the layout here is we have these clusters of 2x2, right? We have a 2x2. Over there is so for a 64 by 64, right? Hold on. So 32 by 32 pixels, right? You got 32 by 32 pixels, which is 16 by 16 cells. Okay, I have 16 by 16 variable cells in here. And that means that if we want 64 of them, right, 64 divided by 16, we need 4 of these. Would it not just be easier to make strips where each UI list is like, 16 elements, and then we just expand it? Or we have if we have 16 by 16 variable cells, wouldn't it just be easier to have 16 lists that are each 16 long, right? That might be easier. So let's look at our let's look at some of the variables we already have, right? So like in Tau Depot, right, we already have like some of these variables that are stored in the memory. Right, so we got the tile quadrant, the tile exponents. This is brush stuff, I believe. Tile quadrant, tile exponent, tile layer, brush X, brush Y, right? So that's like 5 things, 6 things, 7 things, right? So we got like 7 things right here. And well, actually, we can look at the list, right? We already have a list. We can look at the actual enumerations to see how many elements are here. Right, and we're at 11 right now, right? We have kind of these variables here. So we could kind of keep everything to 16 variables, right? We could keep it, every list is like 16 things. And then there's not as much stuff to have to look at. Right, and then if we want a... right? And then we could stack, if we want multiple user interfaces, we can just like stack these lists in different ways. Like, I think that might be easier, right? So maybe just because the ease of how the list, right, the structure of the list, if having the structure of the list really have a very easy mapping onto the data just makes more sense, right? So we have these little clusters. So, okay. So the subdex, the list index, and we're going to say, 0 to 15, to 16 minus 1 is going to be the list index. So we can use the list index of 16 and the button index. The button index 0 also is 0 to 16 minus 1, right? So, which is a little bit crazy, right? But the idea is, right, so we have the list index, UI lists, list index, button index, right? And then this tau list thing, I think this is a bad idea. I know I was thinking some stuff here. Let's steal this for a second. Copy. And let's throw this in here for a second. And let's clean this up, right? So, 2 pixels for buttons text, 1 pixel for the buttons type. And then 1 pixel for the UI list order or for the value. We want the button to be able to render itself, right? So we want to be able, in the shader, we just want to be able to render the UI, right? So we want to know, so we need to know the text, and then we're going to need the type of button, because we're going to need to know what to display, but we don't need to know the list order if we just kind of have if it's just all kind of sequential, right? So I'm thinking something more like this. So something like this. So right, now this value could be something else, right? This value itself could end up being a pointer, right? And then the button type could be like a pointer type that points to something else, right? And that'll help us know how to interpret this. So this is, I think this is the minimal amount of information we're going to need to render kind of like button locations, right? So how to how does renderer know how to render the UI? Right? And this is how we think it's gonna know. Alright, this is what we're thinking. Something like this. Make a note here, right? So at vid IID 0203, and the time is 0120. 2023. Keep with the conspiracies, yeah. So right here, we're just consolidating some notes. So let's wait for 2023 for a second. So right here, for the camera, let's explain it. So for the camera, we're explaining Uilists. So Uilists is going to store user interfaces, and we need to have Uilist data kind of define what all the user interfaces are that need to be loaded into the into memory, and then we also need to formalize some type of structure for how that memory needs to be read. Okay, so we're going to take all these notes here, and we're just going to say so this diagram here is good to keep, I think. But we're going to remove the multi-line comment, and we're going to throw this into our we're going to have to go throw it into here and just say Uilists original thoughts. Actually, let's put it in trash. Uilists original thoughts, right? Because this is even too much clutter for my stream of consciousness, so I'm going to say C, you know, doc/trash/ right, /number 10, right? So if we want the original thoughts for Uilists, this is where we can find it. For our original design considerations, this is where we can find it, right? So at vid IID 0203, right? Time 1 hour, 22 minutes, and 42 seconds. So the original thoughts are going to be in the trash, right? And then over here in the Uilists, we can just say original design notes are scatterbrained. So the original design notes are scatterbrained. C doc/h search for this, right? So if you want to find it, you can find it. You gotta go here, you gotta search for that, right? So the original design notes are scatterbrained here. But it might be useful. So now that we've done that, we can so let's formalize some of the button types, right? So button types. So we need a notion of button types in our Uilists, and we'll just say AAC define AAC 2020 Uilists. BTN type butt type deck decrementer button, right? Define AAC 2020 Uilists button inc, right? To incrementor button, right? And then define AAC 2020 Uilists button num, right? A number display button, right? Number display button. Right, so we can formalize these different button types. Okay. And then we can also put this. Oh, so action button, a button that you can just press that it doesn't display anything, right? That could also be a thing where, right, we don't know what it does anything, right? Define AAC 2020 Uilists, but act, right? Action button. Action. Action call button. And so it would have the actual text, right? So it had the actual text. And so we're gonna say what the text is, and the type of the button is gonna just show what's gonna be over here, right? What ends up over here depends on the type of the button. And then, so P5D, there's like a zoom extents, right? So open keybind for a second. I think keybind is gonna have it. So we had like a snap to viewport extents, right? So this is snap to viewport extents. And that's just gonna be a, I don't know, it's like a button and you press it, right? So I don't know how that works. Maybe it's just a button like this, right? You press it, right? I don't know. I don't know how we're going to render that, right? Here. Let's just put the top on it, right? So, action button. Alright, so this is the kind of basic kind of button interface we need. And I'm not sure of like all the other nitty-gritty details of this, but I know that this is kind of what I want to go for. Something like this. Something like this. I don't know exactly how, but some type of thing like this. I don't know exactly, but this is kind of the idea, right? So we need 7 letters to do this, and then I'm thinking for this, it's if we think about how this kind of partitions, right? It's you know, 1, 2, 3. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? And then over here is going to be like there's going to be a space, and then 1, 2, 3. I'm thinking 3 characters for that. And then in the middle, I'm thinking just a 1 in the middle, right? So I'm thinking something like this. And so I'm saying 7, 8, 9, 10, right? 7, 8, 9, 10, right? And then 11, right? We could have 11, or we could just not have a space here, right? Right? We could do... We could do that, or we could have no space between here. We could have 7 characters, and then 8, 9, 10, right? And if we need to display something, right? If it's a number display, it just displays, you know, up to 3 digits, right? That might not be much room for rendering, though. I don't know. Maybe we want something better, bigger. I don't know. Do we have anything that needs to be in the over 999? Well, if we position a window or something, right, then we're gonna be like, oh crap, we don't have enough precision for that. So I'm thinking, maybe something like this, and then 2 of these. Right, so we could have something where it's like the actual name of the button, btn name, or btn, yeah, the button name and the button display will be the same thing. The display text and the name will be the exact same thing, so that we don't have to worry about this. And then we could have a little divider, and then we could have btn, the button value could take up this much space, right? This could be the button value, or it could be rendering code, right? So I'm thinking 7 plus 7 plus 1, right? And that's 14. So 15 chars per button. But then it's like, well, if we're gonna do that, why not just 16, right? Plus 2, right? Make it a power 2, right? So we could do this, put another space there, right? And now we can have button name, a little spacing, and then button value, right? So 15 characters per button. If each glyph is 8 by 8 glyphs means 8 times 16, right? If we have 16 characters, then 8 times 16. So let's go look at that. So 8 times 16, how big does that make our button? So that makes our button 128. Is that correct? Yeah, I think that 8 times 16, is that correct? 128. That's pretty big. So if we look at paint.net for a second, paint. So we're thinking, okay, I got this button, and it's like, the button is going to be like new button. It's going to be 128 wide, but it's only going to be 8 tall, right? So it's going to look like this. That's a little bit much, isn't it? Like, isn't that a bit much? Like, isn't that a lot of UI? So this is a bit too big. Okay, well, what else could we do? Well, we could try. We definitely need this. This is how big it's going to be here, and then we could try. So there's 7. Why not just try to make it go into 10 easily, right? So here's 7, 8, 9, 10, right? So right, so 7 plus 3, 10 chars per button, right? And then if we did that, right, then that could be a number display that goes up to 999. And then if it needs to be bigger, if it needs to be bigger, I don't know. Let's assume that it doesn't need to be bigger because everything uses palletized color. So we're not going to have that much precision because everything is kind of based on this. And just say, okay, if it's 10 characters per button, 10 times 16, right? And that's, oh, hold on. 10 characters per button, and we need 8 times 10, right? And that's 80 pixels wide. Okay. And so if we were 80 pixels wide, so let's look at this. So file, new. Let's kind of visualize what that looks like. So the width is 80, and it's 8 high. Okay. So now the button is kind of like this, and if we do view actual size, right? So it's still kind of big. But I think that's about as terse as we can get and be reasonable. So let's try. Okay, let's just stick with 10 characters, and then if we need more room, we're going to have to just be clever about it, right? Like if it needs to be a big number display, then, like, the title of the button could be, like, transparent in the background, and the number goes on top of it or something. Something like that, if we need something bigger. So let's just make a thought here, right? So at vid IID 0203, and the time is 1:36, and let's say 1:37. Okay, yeah. So I think that's good there. And yeah, that's just how it's gonna be, I think. Okay, so when we're trying to get through the characters, we're gonna say define AAC 2020 Uilists. BTN wig. Let's just call it button width, and then that equals 10, right? So 10 glyphs wide, right? So define so button height is 1 glyph wide, right? 1 glyph high, right? So 10 glyphs wide and 1 glyph high, right? So the button width and height are defined like this, right? So we're just trying to formalize all the data so that things kind of make sense here, right? So something like this. So the simplest solution is something like this, right? So we're going to remove kind of this commentary here, and we're gonna centralize it up here. So button types. That's not what it is anymore, is it? So it's kind of a layout. So let's remove all this stuff, right? So this is thoughts. So this stuff, we're gonna just chuck this. We're gonna chuck all this stuff. Yeah. We're thinking it's something like this. And 0203, and the time is 0141 42. Oh god. So each UI has up to 16 buttons. So each UI can have up to 16 buttons, right? So this is UI number 1, UI number 2, UI number 3, etc., or actually UI number 0. I changed my mind on this index ordering, right? So 14, 15, or actually 15, 14, 13, 12, right? And this is 0, this is 1, and then dot, 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 and then 14, 15, right? So 16 paint 5D UI elements for P5D UI rect 1, right? So that's kind of what this diagram means. So then the thing is, how are we going to do this? So we have the Tau Depot subdex, which tells us what subsystem we're going to use. What subsystems UI are we using, right? And then we're going to use the UI list index, right? So we'll use the UI list index here, and then we'll use the UI list button index here, right? So the list index and the button index. So what we'll do here is, let's say button types. So let's say this is button types right here, right? This is what that information is, button types. Okay. Right here is just the button display size. Right? This is the button display size here. Okay, button types, button display size. And then we need the list index and the button index, right? So the list, and then we need to set, what do we need to set, right? Well, we have 2 pixels for the button's text, button type, and button value, right? So we're not going to use, so, okay. So in here we have to provide care pointer, button text, 7 chars plus null term. So button text is going to be 7 characters plus a null terminator. And then we're going to have the button button text, button type, right? So U08 but TYP button type. Button type. So button type could be button deck. Could be deck, ink. It could be deck, ink, num, or action. Right. And then we also need a value for the button's value, right? So, so this is in terms of pixels, right? So, right, we're gonna pack within 2 pixels. We're gonna pack in those 7 letters in the null terminator, right? RGBA, RGBA. That gives us 8 characters total. So the button type is actually going to be a uint32, right? So that's a lot of information for what kind of button type we can have, but it's kind of like it fits into our data easy if we just make it a U32. Because under the hood, it's going to be packed into pixel, right? So this is going to be U32 for the button type, which is a lot of, way more button types than we'll ever need, but that's just the way I think it's going to be easiest, right? That also means that the button value, button value, not necessarily needed. Not all buttons will have, not always useful. Right, the button value is not always useful. Well, actually, if the button is a function, then maybe the button value is somehow used as a pointer to the function that needs to be executed, right, or something like that. So that could be useful. Okay, so we've kind of figured out the subdex, the list index, the button index, right, and then we're going to use we'll use this, right. So under the hood, right, we're going to use like, you know, AAC 2020 tau depot put, right? And we're going to, the first parameter is always going to be this, because this is where, my bad, that's not where it's going to be. Let's look at tau depot, or not tau depot, but well, yeah, tau depot. This is the UI rex for the UI lists. UI lists is going to be here. UI lists is going to be here. So if we look at Tauname, right? Tauname is what we're going to use to kind of centralize this kind of stuff, so we know where to find things. Yeah, so UI lists is going to be tau 14. My bad. So when we're going over here, we don't want to use 0, we want to use tau 1, or tau 14. Right? And then, like I said, we can assert that tau 014 is equal to UI list, right? So, right, so this first thing is always UI list, right? So when we use this, we want to use tau depot put directly, right? So this is UI lists. So tau 014 is U. Right, so tau 014 is this thing here is the UI lists memory block, right? Memory block index. Right, it's this memory block index here, which is going to be used for that, right? So this thing that tau, we're going to say UIR for UIREX, or Uilist, UIL. Right? Tau UIL, aka. And then, right, these functions in tau depot, if you look at how they work, right, the next thing it takes is a sub-index, right, a sub-location, a sub-cell index. And to get that sub-cell index, we need to know what list index we're on. So we're going to say that for the list index and the button index, we need to create an XY, right? So let's say int32 button cell X equals the list index, right? So equals the list index. So the list index is gonna give us that, right? So the list index that's inputted will be the button cell X. And then we got to think about this thing where we're doing button. Well, if we're doing it over here, if we're gonna say but, we might as well keep this, you know, but dex for button, not btn. I think is what we want to stick to, right? The first 3 letters. And then, you know, int32 button cell y, right, is going to be, yeah, the list index is the x, and the button index, easy as this, right? So it's literally the layout kind of like is 1-to-1 there, right, for the cells. So then once we have the cells, we just got to do an index to xy location to find the subcell we're going in here, right? So we're going to go like index to, or xy to index C99. And not the best formula, but let's just roll with it. So here's the y, right? There's the y. Take the x. So here's the x. Take the x. So that's x. This is y. Now there's a multiplication by 4 because that's the width, but the width of this is actually 16, right? So, or yeah, 16, right? So let's look at the diagram, right? So if we look at the diagram for the lowest level in here, this is 16 by 16 cells. And we're down within the var cell width, right? So, we're going to put this in the functions file, but we just want to kind of so this width here, define number of cells, number of cells and the width, right? So number of cells, width is 16, right? 16 tau depot dia var cell, right? And then define knock height is also 16, right? And this is 16 tau depot hashtag dia var cell, right? So it's 16 by 16 cells for there's 16 by 16 variable cells, right? So we'll go undef knock width, undef knock high, right? And knock, number of cells, right? Knock is number of cells, so we might want to make a note of that, right? Knock, number of cells. Okay. 01, 02. Yeah, okay. So the knock width, not height, right? And we might want to codify that somewhere, right? So we might want to put that in our notes, right? So knock width. So we might want to put that over in our notes over here as well. So might want to codify what the hell we're doing here, right? So so if we type that correctly, we'll just say, oh, that's what we wanted, right? Right, and then knock. If we type this one correctly, we'll also display it with brackets around it and put a little check mark. Now, the reason we use brackets around it after we type it is so that we know where. Let's say that there's a keyword called pizza. Let's say there's a keyword called pizza, right? And there's there's not a keyword called New York pizza, right? And so if I'm typing in my shortcuts and I type pizza, right, and it replaces it with a little check mark, right, and says do I have a check mark? Yeah. And then it says, oh, look, you spelled it correctly, right? And then New York pizza doesn't exist, right? So if I type New York pizza, it also puts a check mark here. But what my script actually saw was just pizza, right? It recognized the word pizza, so it put a check mark, right? And so I think that, oh, New York pizza is a keyword, but it isn't actually, right? And so if we do this, we are misled, right? But if we write it like this, where we put brackets around it, there's a bracket and there's a bracket, then we're like, oh, okay, this part doesn't exist. It recognized this, right? So that's the reason why we do it like that, right? So we want to verify without a doubt that these are the variable names that exist in our shortcuts. And so the next thing we want to do is just like, you know, if we type it kind of something like that, right, which is like similarly enough, then we're just going to autocorrect it. Okay. And then for the height, right, so knock height, and knock height, right? Now, if we type it backwards, we're not gonna go with that, right? So if we do something backwards, like a widnock, or widnock, or widnock, we're gonna say backwards use, and okay. And if we do something like high knock, and high knock, then we're going to say that's backwards and use knock height, right? Like that. Okay. So yeah, so we just want to codify that a little bit in here so we know what the hell this is. So this Uilists put thing, right? So we have the button cell X, the button cell Y, right? And then we're just going to say, oh, this is the width, right? So this is knock width, right? So we take the width, which is the stride, multiplied by the X, and we add the Y. And then we have the actual cell location, right? So we're looking at tau-depot.f, right? This dex var, right? So int 32, right? Dex var. Uh, 0, 0, 0 to 255, right? Equals this formula, right? The index to xy formula, right? You know, hash to at index xy to index formula. I don't think I actually put that in my notes. So in my notes, right, we want to know, like, what do we mean when we say this? So at index to xy formula, that just means that we're using the index to xy formula. means we are using the standard xy to index formula that takes xy location and converts it to 1D index based on scan line order, right? Right to left, then top to bottom, right? That's what that means. Okay. Okay, so now we have this dex var thing, right? And we just want to make it absolutely, we want to name these things so we can find things, right? So the subindex for this needs to be subdex, right? So we literally have it right here. Oops. Control Z. The Tau Depot subdex. Right? AKA dex sub 000-015, right? Also known as this, right? Now we named it this just so that we could find it easily, right? So that we know that, oh, this comes from Tau Depot, right? It's somewhere in Tau Depot, right? So AKA, let's say AKA dex sub 000-015, right? So we might want to make a note of that just to connect the dots a little bit better. So we take this dex, right, to figure out what subsystem we're looking at, what editor index we're looking at. It's the editor number, right? This is the editor number, basically. The list index is what UI list are we gonna modify here, right? Okay. And it can go 0 to 1. And in here, let's button types. Define section. Main defines. Let's call them main defines for this section. And then we have button types, but we also want like list IDs. Right, list IDs. And we're just going to say that, define AAC 2020 UI lists. UI lists, PAINT5D, PAINT5D, and then we'll go find in Tau Depot, right? We have probably P5D UI rect 1, right? UI rect 1. Here's UI rect 1, right? So let's say that this is also known as P5D UR1. Let's take this token here, right? And so this is the location, right? So this is the this right here is where the UI rectangle is stored, but this is the this right here is this is the actual user interface for the rectangle, but this is hold on. Water. God damn it. Okay. Fucking bullshit. Like, I have, like, material in the basement, and it's kind of important that it doesn't get destroyed. And we got this bullshit where somebody put the wrong kind of stuff in the dishwasher. Somebody, like, loaded the dishwasher with soap. So, great. Okay, so this right here will be like for this UI rect 1, right? And so I'm thinking to make the connection obvious, we'll just call it UR1, right? So it's technically, now we could, if we call it UR1, maybe that's confusing. So we could either say this or we could say UI1, right? Or UO1, user interface 01, or I mean, if we have up to 16, this is going to create a problem eventually, right? Because we got up to we only have if we have 16 slots, but we only have one digit here. Well, maybe 16 user interfaces is too much. So maybe what we want to do is say, you know, right? 16 divided by 2 is 8, right? And that's still a pretty decent amount, right? So maybe we want to rethink this and say, sure, this is P5D. This is for P5D UI rect 1, right? Or maybe it's, you know, UI1, right? Or UO1, right? UI1 like that. So maybe we want like 0 to 7 for the index, right? Over here, like the list index. But then how does that change how we're partitioning the memory, right? So we're saying that, we're saying that the, we're just not going to use it and use it for something else. Like, why are we going to do that, right? And I'm thinking what it could be is it could just be a parallel information section, right? Like, we could just store even more. We could just store something parallel to here and say that over here is a parallel block where we can just store more information for a certain user interface element if we need it, right? We could do that, right? Maybe that's how we want to do it. Because like 16 user interface elements for one editor does seem like a lot. And we have to think about how we're going to connect the dots in the code as well. So list index, button index. So we could do like, so we could check the check inputs. So if we're ear checking the inputs here, then, you know, we want to assert that this subindex, right, is less than or equal to 15, or 16 minus 1. Right, and we want to assert that this list index, the list index, we're going to say the list index needs to be less than or equal to, you know, 8 minus 1, right? We're going to chop that in half. So we're going to say 1 to 8 minus 1, this list index. And then we're going to assert Uilists buttdex, the button index, is going to be less than or equal to 16 minus 1. Okay. And then what we can do is We have another putter function. So we have like a put main, right? And then we have AAC 2020 UI lists, put extra. Right, extra. And this is main, right? Now the thing is, if we do this, do we really need to button text, button type, button value, right? We want all the basic, this is the basic information that we think is good, right? So we might as well keep it like that. And then if we need some type of extra information, right, we need a button that's extremely large and needs more characters, or some other like special detail, right? It's a special button, maybe the special button type requires some extra information. Then we use the extra, right? And the extra is, it takes the exact same information to locate what we're looking at. And then we just say like, takes a U32 pointer, extra data, it takes it's the extra array, which is the actual data, and then it also takes a int32, and this is ext number of uint32's worth of data, right? And this is extra data array, right? So the data is going to be in terms of uint32's, right? And the thing is we're just using 4 kind of pixels, right? We're still using 4 pixels. So this can't be over 4 things, right? So this tau depot, the put function we're going to use, okay, so we're going to use this half width here then, right? So, well, actually, hold on. We're actually not going to use this half width, right? We're going to still use this, but this dex var, the button index can't be, the button index is the y-axis, right? The list index, okay, yeah, so it's fine like that. So this half width, do not use. We don't want to use this. Never mind. Alright, so we don't want to actually use that. That was a mistake. I thought it was something I would need, but no. Okay, so we got this half width, and also let's put some checksums in here, right? So, 01, 02, 03, right? Let's put some checksums there, because they're at the top and bottom. Right, and so this width variable is going to be used for the calculations. And for this tau depot put here, right, we're going to use the same tau 14 thing. We're going to use the sub-index, right? And it's going to be all the same math, except... so let's take this for a second. So this right here is calculate cell index. Right, so this is calculate the cell index. Calculate var cell index, right? That's what we're doing here. And let's indent that and make it all nice and whatnot. Right? Then we're going to steal this code, right? We're going to steal all this code and reuse it, but modify it slightly. So over here, right, Uilists, we got the Uilist dex, we got the button dex. So we use the same button index. However, this is going to be a plus 8, right? So this is plus 0. But this is offset, right? Because parallel extra data segment to the right. Reason is because 16 Uilists is too much. 2, my variables can only go up to 9 anyways, right? Example, P5D UI rect 1, P5D UI rect 2, P5D UI rect 3, P5D UI rect 4, etc., right? So we couldn't even address that. With the current terse scheming, we don't even have enough room to address that without screwing up our source code, right? And so some of this so we're changing the workings of the code based on some of the ways we like to write the source code, which is kind of like, is that okay? But let's just go with it, right? So we just shift this up. So this is not quite right. So the button index doesn't change. My bad. The Uilist dex, right? So it's parallel on the x, right? So we plus it over here, right? So we shift everything over to the right, right? So let's make a note of this, right? So at vid iid 0203 time 0220 and 0221, right? Shift to right, right? So we're going to shift the data all the way over to the right. So when we're looking at this. This is the lists, and this is extra data, right? So if we're looking at this, we might want to just call this like this is extra, and this is this is main, right? So right here, this is main. Right? And then over here is the extra, right? Now the thing is that main and extra, this is kind of, obtuse, not an obtuse, but a kind of cryptic token name, right? So, uh, button main, and then this is, you know, button extra. So but ext, right? But ext, button extra data. Okay. And then over here, right? But main, button main. Button main data, right? So the main data for the button, and then the extra data for the button, right? So then we could call this, you know, right? This, and then we could call this, right? A little weird, right? But okay, and this could be but ext, right? So button main, button ext, right? So that way when we can highlight this now and be like, what the hell is that? But then we can find them down here, but ext and but main, right? So the main data and the extra data. And so this extra data, well, how many U32s do we have? Well, we have a maximum of 4, right? So whatever data we're putting there, we can't put too much. So, you know, error check inputs. And we're just going to say that it's going to work like a calloc, where the easiest way to do it is, you know, if there's extra room in here, we'll just fill it with zeros. We'll zero fill it. So let's take the original inputs we have, the original error checks, because those are still good. All right, so subdex, Uilists, listdex, button index, and then assert that U32 pointer 0 is not equal to the extra array, right? The array of data can't be null, right? And then we want to assert that now the question is, do we want to do this as the array, or do we want to do this with like a whole bunch of parameters? What do we want to do? I think it'll be easier this way, so let's just do it this way, right? So assert that, you know, int32 0 is less than or equal to, is less than ext len, right? So the length needs to be greater than 0, right? We also want to assert that int32 4, right? There's 4 elements. So less than or equal to, like, so xlen xlen needs to be less than or equal to this, right? So the bounds check, right? So xlen has to be greater than 0, but it has to be less than or equal to 4, right? 4 max elements. So here's the array, here's the length. Okay, so we got this tau 14 is what we're going to use here. Tau 14 should be this thing called Uilists. Okay, and then the button cell X is going to be offsetted by 8, right? Offset by 8 because it's in this section here is this section here. If we look at the thing here, it's listdex plus 8, right? So this is listdex plus 8 is what this section is here, right here, right? And then let's just put this at the top because it's going to be easier to diagram. Listdex plus 8, and then the other thing, right, is just listdex plus 0, right? No offset. So we might want to just say, we might want to just make some more slots here. to make this easier to be lined up and stuff, right? So maybe if we want to... let's change around this diagram a little bit. So I'm thinking 0, right, dot, 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 right, dot, 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 and then we go up to 7, right? So 06, 07, right? And then over here, there's like, let's put a little divider, right? 7. This is 08, right? 08, 09, right? And then dot, 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 right? So this right here, dot, 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 dot. And this is 14, and this is 15, right? And boom, boom, boom. Let's change that around back and okay. So then, right, this section, this partition is list index plus 0, whereas the next partition is list index plus 8. Right? There's this partition offset here. Okay. So let's change our mind on this, right? So changing our mind on this, so 0, 2, 3, actually no, decided we only, deprecated video comment, but if you want to see where that is, right? If you want to look at that, if you're curious, we'll keep that in there for now. And then 02, 29, and let's say 42. 8 lists max. 8 UI lists per editor. Right? 8 UI lists per editor is basically what we're saying, right? So we can have, for each list, you can have up to 16 elements in that list, right? And there's 8 lists max, and then for every single list, right? So this button, so this is a button within the list, right? And this is extra data for that button if we need it, right? I don't know if we'll need it, but we'll just partition it like that, right? So it's there if we need it, but I don't think we'll actually need it. Okay. And so we're still on video 203. Okay, so we were gonna do like some shopbot stuff, but now we're like getting kind of crazy here and trying to like do all this stuff. So we might as well finish these thoughts, right? If this is the way we're gonna roll, then sure, okay, but we gotta finish these thoughts, right? So the idea is we drink some coffee, try to get motivated, and the idea is that, you know, we want to do something, right? Like we want to be productive. And if we just think about, oh my god, should I do engine code or should I do Etsy stuff? Well, doing neither is, you're definitely going to regret, right? Doing one or the other, you might regret having chosen one over the other, but it's definitely better than the option of just not doing anything. So I don't want to have like a analysis paralysis. So we're going to finish these thoughts because I'm having some good thoughts here as to how this user interface system is going to go together, how we're going to render it, and all that stuff, right? So UI1, right? So UI1 right here, and that's for P5D URect1 and P5D visible user interface rect1, right? So that's what those are for, right? So this UI list is kind of like a little, what do you call it? um, a little bit crazy, right? But we want to know what system it's for, and then we want to know, we want to associate it with, yeah, that's fine. Let's just put this up here. Let's indent this, I guess, and just make a note of what this is for, right? So it's for, that's what it's for. It's for this stuff here. Is that the best way to do it? I don't know. So list IDs, right? So here's this list, and here's where it's being stored, right? And we'll just say 1, right? We'll just give it a 1, right? And then if we want to do different user interface recs, right, we can go all the way up to, we can go 0 to 0 to 8, right? So the UI1 here is for this, right? So we can keep a little comment as to what this one is used for, right? It's going to be used for these, and then if we highlight this, is it there? Okay. So UI 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, right? So 9 little things. I don't think we're ever going to use all of that, but it's there. It's there if we need it, right? And I don't know if we're being kind of wasteful or not. Right? We're kind of taking educated guesses on how much memory is a reasonable amount of memory to use, and then we're just going with it, right? So I gotta take a break, so I'll be back. Okay, so I'm still eating. I'm gonna stop the stream, come back later. And after I'm done eating. And then we're gonna make sure that Uilists and Tauname are kind of stubbed in. So Uilists and Tauname need to be put somewhere. UI frags is going to use Uilist stuff to know how to render stuff. So Uilist has to come before UI frags. Okay, I'll be back later.